crime, and punishment. Throughout my life, it was clear there was something wrong with how I was being treated. Most of the time, I just assumed it was all about something being wrong with me, not them. Year after year of trying different things or reapplying earlier things in greater measures. For instance, instead of investing 4 figures in marketing, I would invest 5 figures within a year. I got the same miserable results. In my 30s, I was active in social justice work related to religious abuse I suffered as a gay man. I started to tour and create a lot of media. I was upstaged by others whose stories rarely seemed more compelling than mine, and they all ended up successful and supported. I was fading into obscurity and noticed leaders in my community trying to suppress and exclude me, which came as a shock. I was also working on an entertainment career in addition to other projects that required a lot of exposure and cooperation. After receiving a federal grant through a vocational program, among other forms of vocational support, I was met with silence from every business contact I tried to work with. I decided to ask several of my closest family members and others in the community for just some word-of-mouth advertising. I was met with such contempt, I went further into shock and confusion. My vocation was the main thing, in addition to self-care and other stuff, that was keeping me sane and alive. If not, I would start to self-destruct. It was literally saving my life. This was absolutely essential. I also depended on others to help with things I simply could not do myself. Year after year of hardships and even suffering near-fatal tragedies trying to succeed in my hometown, and then traveling around North America and trying everything I could possibly think of to succeed, I also seized the opportunity to think outside the box and dig deep enough into finding answers. I thought the problems were a handful of traits I possessed that got me excluded from every opportunity to be successful. It turned out that others with similar disadvantages found success. I thought it was all about fighting leaders who I realized were so addicted to power that they saw me as opportunities to abuse their power and get away with it. But why me? Everyone kept telling me how strong they thought I was and how privileged I was perceived, and it kept throwing me into confusion, shame, and despair. I was trapped in professional obscurity, and oddly, every other aspect of my life had the same results: overlooked. My living situation, my close relationships, and my social life, my health care, and everything else to do with being valued, heard, seen, and regarded as a human being, were all suffering the same demise. I was being banished from society. It was crime and punishment. The punishment was clear, but nobody told me what my crime was. After talking to a lot of houseless people and others who had suffered the same fate, it became clear that I was experiencing a sociological phenomenon. My life felt more and more like an episode of The Twilight Zone. With all of this crazy behavior around me, it was very challenging to keep my sanity. The deeper I dug, the uglier things looked, and the more torturous things became. I learned that I was not only the only person suffering, yet to my surprise, everyone I met who was trapped in obscurity refused to fight, nor would they do anything for my cause. Although I can relate to some success stories, it became clear that what I was attempting, based on my set of details, was simply unprecedented as far as I could find. I can imagine that there have been women and men who have broken themselves out while alone, yet I just couldn't find any good examples. And I've studied a lot of people's lives. One of the things I explored in my journeys was this dangerous question: is something tampering with humanity? It's obvious things are out of balance in a lot of aspects of society. But what about those who remain in places of influence? Prison break. Imagine you are a puppy in a large litter. You watch puppies biting each other and testing whether they're the alpha or not. It's pretty easy to figure out your place in the world. You just watch what happens, try some things, and stick to what works. If you get bit and someone gets away with it, while you bite back and you do not get away with it, sadly, you are not an alpha. And you are destined to be the underdog the rest of your doggy existence. Because when an underdog starts acting like an alpha and bites other dogs, it is the job of all the others to put the lower-ranking dog in their place. Enabling others to remain in their rank is part of the order, in addition to making sure everyone knows and behaves appropriately according to their particular designation. Both leaders and followers are keeping order. This may not always be the case with human interaction. Socially undeveloped people do not always see rank. In fact, those who suffer from various types of, quote, developmental, end quote, issues find social norms to be confusing. This was the case with me throughout most of my life, especially my childhood. As long as I was impressing others and contributing significantly, I had this crazy idea that I would be recognized for my efforts. In addition to my utopian distortions of a sick society, I was even told things like since I was young. If that wasn't strange enough, when I started trying to learn about success, I was told to just do the same things as they did. Thus, the chronic failure imitates the habits of successful people, only to find more failure. They get different results doing the same things as their leaders. Because of my upbringing, I was never really able to develop normally when it came to a lot of essential traits. And one of them was what I reluctantly refer to as social skills. It took me a long time to really come to terms with what made these people get so much attention. Most of them were privileged to be some kind of insider or have other similar privileges. Some were just lucky to be chosen for whatever reason and included, often by accident or under false pretenses. When all else fails, luck and privilege have run out. What's left? Success and failure could ultimately be a matter of simple biology. This is where things get messy. Statistically, someone can bang on a door for their entire lifetime, and for some, it will eventually open. Luck is just probability. But changing your biology, that's a different animal. Like the old saying about a leopard changing its spots. That is why I used to come to a lot of analogies related to imprisonment. In fact, when it comes to social ranking, having talked to former inmates, immediately learning about status was part of their survival. In a lot of ways, civilization resembles this type of prison setting, where we are trapped behind bars of expectations and unspoken rules in addition to the ones that are written down. Ironically, the rules that are written and spoken are the ones that are so often broken, while the real code is based on things that are not communicated clearly, nor spoken about at all. I have noticed that this subject is one of the most taboo things to bring up in most environments, although there are a few rare exceptions. Speaking to not only former inmates, another group of people who will gladly discuss social ranking are the houseless. Escaping from the social status of a, quote, homeless, end quote, person can be almost as difficult as escaping from prison. This is why I refer to prison break examples found in stories like The Shawshank Redemption, in particular the film adaptation. Creativity, persistence, and knowledge were some of the things that the protagonist used. In addition to working on his escape, he also used those skills to make things better for himself and for others. That character wrote letters weekly for over 5 years just to get something that they needed. Those in authority finally got so tired of those letters that they eventually gave in. Another thing stated in that story was about being institutionalized as opposed to what I call empowerment. You can accept your role in society or fight it. But one thing for me has been clear as I have fought and lost so many times. It can take a lot more than fighting to get unstuck from being stuck. One of the main characters in the story was named Red, R-E-D. He stated in the movie, "I'm telling you, these walls are funny. First, you hate them, and then you get used to them. Enough time passes, so you get to depend on them. That's institutionalized. They send you here for life, and that's exactly what they take. The part that counts, anyway." He goes on to say, "I have to remind myself that some birds aren't meant to be caged. Their feathers are just too bright. And when they fly away, the part of you that knows it was a sin to lock them up does rejoice. But still, the place you live in is that such more drab and empty that they're gone. I guess I just miss my friend." Some birds indeed are not meant to be caged, like hummingbirds, for instance. Studies have shown that it limits their lifespan and increases their mortality rate. Besides imprisonment, I also refer to another similar subject, isolation. In fact, I sadly talk about alienation a lot when it comes to how society trains people to stay in their rank. As we know, solitary confinement is still practiced today and is, in my opinion, the most cruel form of punishment that is sanctioned by my government. Speaking of cruelty, American psychologist Harry Harlow did some monumental experiments on monkeys, especially when it comes to the issues concerning social isolation. Although his conclusions prove that isolation makes us go crazy and cause serious and even fatal risks, we really don't need a researcher to tell us that. It's a no-brainer. However, he did, and it is a scientific fact. So hooray for Harlow. Infant monkeys were given a mannequin instead of a mother, but then again, so did a lot of us. In my experience, being alone is the worst thing for people in my situation, although I do believe that there are such things as actual hermits. They are rare, and perhaps most of them are not that way by choice. In addition to alienated being the worst thing to suffer, the most cruel punishment allowed in my society is so easily dished out to those who refuse to stay in their low rank. I call it an unconscious, crowdsourced punishment, and it happens frequently. Reasons for self-harm are often related to these kinds of social phenomenon. When a society is undermining someone's value, and when civilization has no more use for someone who won't take their place, these kinds of behaviors are way more common than most people realize. If people are valued based on how much attention they get, what happens to women and men who are not recognized for their contributions? Although we probably suffer the same things, I must sometimes wonder if men and women might be appraised differently. Women can lose their value to society with age, because so much of society still values younger women for various reasons. Men may not lose their value simply because of aging. However, if a man is not gaining power, authority, and status, he will often be treated as less valuable, although this isn't always the case with everyone. Part of the downward spiral of losing status is that this kind of treatment contributes to increased trauma, and more trauma contributes to less functioning, which contributes to less value placed on the individual. Even though there seems to be a lot of resources for the traumatized, most of it is useless and even counterproductive. Even if the woman or man is desperately trying everything that is available to stop the process, sadly, they find this cycle of trauma as an unstoppable force that ruins all of their relationships, environments, and opportunities. This is especially for those unrecognized in creative careers, the sciences, or other related vocations. Leaders are often so jealous of creators because the more a leader dominates, the less likely they are to authentically create. A lot of our leaders are not just government and media people. Many of the most powerful people in your life are your providers. Healthcare and mental health workers gain more power and prestige, especially since they were given so much admiration around the pandemic and were so often praised as healthcare heroes. Ironically, in the United States, healthcare has continued to diminish while it has gained even more power. Another thing to consider, like on a naval ship, for instance, the captain has the most authority. However, the doctor, who technically answers to the captain, in some ways can have more power than anyone. If the doctor believes that the captain is unfit, whether physically, emotionally, or mentally, for duty, they can be relieved of their command. Although this is something that we might just see on television, it is something to consider about the power of healthcare industry itself. The death penalty is rarely practiced in my country, and almost every other state outlaws capital punishment. However, I do wonder about why certain people die as a result of medical care. If a surgeon doesn't like gays, for instance, and a gay man goes under the knife without any emergency contacts, who's to say that it was just some type of accident? Based on my findings, this is more of a reality than most people would care to imagine. I think that Intentional malpractice in the context of discrimination issues is not much of an issue compared to a general mistreatment of various types of underprivileged people. Denying adequate care and other forms of abuse and neglect. This contributes to a myriad of social problems, including forms of self-harm like substance abuse. I would go so far to say that in some ways, self-harm actually, although probably unintentional, helps providers in a handful of ways. It enables them to blame their patients, in addition to the irony that they get a lot of funding for substance abuse programs. At the same time, that's all up for debate. My point is that there is a sort of energy that comes from all of this nonsense. It comes from an ancient and primal source that was part of early humanity. Picture a tribal unit. Everyone has their job in a big family that is likely nomadic and functioning in a hunter-gatherer context. They have to rely on each other and in this very dangerous primitive world. When someone gets hurt or sick, it is in the best interest of the tribe to care for them, unless they're contagious or beyond repair. If a younger man, for instance, suffers from a debilitating back injury, he knows he is basically useless and a burden to his family. This mentality is still fairly prevalent in a lot of communities that uphold a traditional worldview. I wonder if there might be a sort of built-in self-destruct mechanism that still exists in modern humanity. I have this very unhappy thought that our nervous system produces this kind of self-destruct mechanism in order to somehow protect the overall well-being of functioning communities, of functioning people. That is one way to explain why self-harm is almost always follows some kind of demotion, whether it's a loss of a job, relationship, or a debilitating condition. I see two forms of self-destruction, ultimate self-harm, without going into detail, and something that I reluctantly refer to as a slow death. A long-term death effect, so to speak, can take many forms, whether it's getting trapped in some kind of cultic relationship or group, a substance abuse problem, or sometimes just as simple as overeating. These are people who don't want to live, nor do they literally want to die. However, their nervous system seems to try to convince them that they simply do not belong anywhere and that they should basically somehow leave Earth. If you were to go back far enough, when we literally did resemble animals rather than humans, you will find that when a member of their clan got permanently or terminally debilitated, they were ostracized and left for dead. This is a practice that I often observe in my life, currently living in the Sonoran Desert. Coyotes are common, and so is the mange. Luckily, these poor diseased pups have a town nearby to mooch off of and dig into our dumpsters and survive. In the wild, they rely on each other and will likely perish if alienated from other coyotes. Another animal trait is to strengthen their DNA by natural selection. If you want to screw a healthy coyote rather than a sick one, although this helps the species overall, I do wonder if we not only like to mate with healthy people, is that another reason why so many people think that power and status make people, even ugly people, more sexually desirable? It is likely that we carry similar instincts to not only banish those who we consider to be useless, a threat or a burden, but in addition, also to do something similar to ourselves. There can be a sort of crowdsourced brainwashing that might only consist of microaggressions. However, over time, these can add up in the unconscious and begin to wreak havoc on people's ability to see themselves clearly. This can lead to troubling dreams, nightmares, depression, anxiety, and eventually the person starts to self-destruct. Disabled people who are deaf, blind, or handicapped seem to get annoyed at all the unwanted attention as people clamoring to offer unsolicited services, while those with invisible disabilities feel the very opposite. In addition, there are some peers who suffer with debilitating conditions that are somehow known to just about everyone. This is often the case when an alpha type or a public figure gets diagnosed with an invisible disability. And these principles may not apply. In addition, there's a staggering number of those who suffer from noticeable disabilities who surprisingly get overlooked, even to the point of being a fatality at risk. From what I gather, those with unrecognized debilitating conditions are mostly viewed as a nuisance or even as annoying. Other socially acceptable labels put on these peers are crazy, or the misuse of the word drama in the context of their suffering. Another unhappy thing I have observed in all this rhetoric propagated by those who try to soothe their conscience in futile efforts to parade around flags of affirmation, hashtags of awareness, and their disposable income filled tax-deductible donations to useless charities that specialize in marketing, fundraising, dead-end referrals, and propagating more of their eloquent words of tolerance and diversity. One of the most disturbing things I witnessed in my life when I got to see the dark side of Goodwill Industries. That's another story for another book. I hate that having been banished by society, especially because of disability issues, has given me opportunities to see the grotesque underbelly of healthcare, charities, and other surreal experiences that our blessed leaders will never see, nor could they see if it were presented to them. Sometimes these crimes are hiding in plain sight. But one thing I've learned is that someone has to first believe that something is possible before their brain will allow them to form memories and thoughts of the facts and evidence presented to them. Being an alpha is actually tough in a lot of ways, although it obviously has its perks. For one thing, it feels natural. It feels right. It feels like it's their place in society to lead, to rule, and that they possess the responsibility to do this silly stuff that we call leadership. The alphas feel entitled to their resources, so there is no need to express gratitude or repay anything they possess that is in excess or unfair. Being an underdog is tough, too, although agonizing when it comes to some people who have been trampled down to the bottom of society, who might actually possess valuable skills, talents, or ideas. What if nobody believes you have a skill and never gives you the opportunity? What if they've made their mind up that you are so useless to society that even if they witness a taste of your abilities and that their minds have to reject what they see and hear? What if you are denied job opportunities as a result of this ruined reputation to the point when you cannot even get a volunteer job? It sounds surreal, but these things happen, and they happen more than we realized. Whatever happened to that lady who visited that church last year might be a hint that someone might be overlooked by society. Whatever happened to that guy who left school for some reason? I am heartbroken how little I hear of any mention of people that fall through the cracks and disappear. But what's worse is that there is little to nothing done to check on these people to see if there is something that requires attention that nobody has offered. This attention might be validation of something that they are suffering from and somehow surviving on their own, or a notable accomplishment, or could be something that they have just yet to accomplish because of an inability to express their gift entirely on their own. Picture a small backwards town that has an aversion to racial minorities. A person of color tries to buy something and is told, "Your money is no good here." In addition, someone wrote a check and made a donation that will never get deposited because we don't think you have that kind of money. The value of a person is somewhat like currency. All you have to do is look at their bank account, but what's the point of proof if someone's mind is going to refuse the evidence anyway? Michael Faraday is an example of someone who almost accidentally was discovered, or probably just lucky. Faraday was the kind of kid who talked funny, and who shouldn't have been recognized for anything, even though he was a genius. What I would like to hear are discussions about the possibility of countless valuable people throughout history who took their ideas, their gifts, their talents to their graves, never having been considered as having anything to contribute to society. I don't mind theorizing about little green men that live on the other side of the galaxy. However, they are likely to exist somewhere. Therefore, every time someone talks about the Drake equation or something like that, I would hope that we would interject a possibility of valuable lost works that only existed in the minds of brilliant but alienated people throughout history of humanity. But that's a good way to kill a lovely cocktail party, and who doesn't just love a swell party? An elephant in every room. We live in a world of leaders and followers. In every group of people, there's someone at the top, someone at the bottom, and everyone else in the middle in some kind of ranking order. Most of the time, unless the group happens to be modeled after the military, for instance, the Salvation Army, or you are literally in the armed forces, these ranks are nonverbal and often not written anywhere. If left unattended, groups of children will eventually gravitate to these kinds of social systems. I used to play King of the Hill when I was a kid, and that game was never prompted by an adult for the most part. It was not even allowed. The weakest, smallest, sickest kids are always at the bottom of the dog pile. We used to call it pig pile. When children are left unattended, animal-like behaviors like this will probably take over. In my opinion, they learn these traits by watching adults and dismissing what we teach them that might contradict our unfair social system mentality. They do what we do, not what we say. In order to treat the symptoms of these deeply rooted problems, we love to implement a myriad of failed programs, trying desperately to undermine bullying, while promoting healthy competition. Most environments we exist in have rules and regulations for various behaviors and things to keep people relatively safe. For instance, don't run with scissors, although people still find ways to overpower and hurt others constantly. I have never encountered rules or anything that have specifically protect people from alpha types, even the alphas who are politely walking with scissors. Therefore, every group, meeting, organization, family, church, or public place runs on what I consider to be social anarchy. When it comes to those who get attention and those who don't, it's about status and ranking, or in other words, survival of the fittest. We expect the alpha dog to lead. We expect the underdog to follow, and we expect the runt to die. The weak and useless pup at the bottom of the social order of the litter is nothing more than a snack to any other hungry dog or critter. There aren't even enough teats for all of them to get milk sometimes. The animal that gets left out should die. That's nature's law. But for those of us crazy enough to follow science rather than faith, might believe in this depressing theory we call evolution. I believe it. Don't judge me, although chances are you do too. It's just that my particular Puritan slant on evolution and natural selection and all of this crap is that I don't believe there was a higher power involved in the process. It's no different than letting everything in your refrigerator rot while you're away for a long time. It's going to get ugly, and it's going to turn into something else if left on its own. Unless society recognizes individuals, not just groups, as being treated certain ways by their particular status and rank, these problems will not only get out of control, they will touch every area of our lives: friends, jobs, intimate relationships, faith, science, art, music, government, and stupid kids' games. Personal power can have little to do with someone's personal privileges when they are in their own communities. Therefore, once a high-ranking person is removed from an underprivileged group, their power changes. This is also the same when an underdog-type person functions at the bottom of a rich and powerful family in their rich and powerful country and finds them functioning in a third-world country. They can become a god. Trying to produce an accurate power assessment is nearly impossible because they could score high or low and suddenly walk into another room, which changes their status drastically. This is some really good stuff. I have actually been developing a sort of tool like this over the years, and I have found another hindrance on how effective it is to do a power assessment. Powerful people refuse to do it. In addition, those who have no power don't want to take a test like that because it's so obvious and that the outcome is so depressing. It's one thing for a highly privileged person to have a hard time acknowledging their position in the global economy. This is quickly remedied by giving their extra money from their disposable income to useless and phony charity organizations. Nonprofits are nothing more than sleeping pills, in my experience. Having dealt with charities for decades, they are great for those of us bleeding hearts to alleviate things like white guilt and give us that nice fluffy feeling that our 2 cents are making an actual tangible difference in the lives of some little brownish barefoot person in a muddy place across the ocean. thus helping guilt-ridden, hyper-privileged people sleep at night. Sleeping pills. How do you sleep at night? It's such a common cliche that rarely gets challenged. And my personal experience up until now has never even been questioned. And in fact, unfair leaders, abusers of power, and other people like that are often asked that silly question in movies, television, and even real-life situations, probably by people who watch too much TV. The protagonists are so disappointed to discover that these villains actually sleep quite well. The way I see it, abusers are the ones who sleep well, and victims are the ones who don't, although mainstream society rarely seems to acknowledge this. Just like baboons, the ones at the top have less stress, less trauma, and those at the bottom have to feel like they must be on alert, in addition to other things that make lower-ranking animals suffer. Another reason why nobody would want to take some kind of test to assess how much personal power they possess is that no matter how powerful someone is, they always feel like they're toward the bottom. Followers stress them out and try to undermine their power and make them feel powerless. If there were a way to assess who, out of billions of people, might actually be the most powerful person in the world, perhaps he might feel that way. Perhaps he's the leader of the most powerful nation on earth. Perhaps he's the richest guy in the world. Here's the funny part. No matter how powerful someone literally is, and there is, with the exception of one in billions, always going to be someone more powerful. This causes a lot of insecurities and other issues, including the fact that powerful people just don't feel powerful. This is one of the reasons, in addition to the addiction of power, that powerful people rarely, if ever, take responsibility for their power because they're in denial that they have the power to share, or enough power to share, rather. It's bizarre. They simply cannot see it. It's obvious to everyone around them, like the emperor's new clothes, and as if they walk around powerless. I have had countless conversations with extremely powerful people, mostly because of my background in media, social justice work, and my travels. And I give them opportunities to share their influence when it's required of them, and they refuse every single time. They can't do it. It's pathological. They can throw their money at stuff and people in addition to their mostly useless advice, but they have to keep secret people a secret, unless there's some kind of anomaly, and enable the visible people to gain more visibility no matter the cost of unfairness and injustice. When someone compliments you and someone else criticizes you, your psyche will put about 10 times more weight on the negative than the positive. In order for you to feel good about yourself after dressing up nice for a party, for instance, you'll need roughly 10 compliments to compensate for the single negative remark. For a lot of underdog types, it might not matter if he or she gets thousands of compliments. That one criticism will ruin that evening. In a similar way, suffering the abuse of power can cause someone to hyper-focus on things that are significantly out of proportion. When an athlete is crying about a sprained ankle and demanding emotional support from a paraplegic in a wheelchair, we think it's pathetic behavior. However, I have had countless times when people that have way too much power complain about their boss or their leaders. The very few people that might have any authority over them make them feel so powerless that they cannot acknowledge how much power they have over multitudes of people under their authority or influence. I would imagine that even the most powerful guy in the world has to answer to some laws, and that he, in some ways, is bound to various things that even he might not be able to get away with. The fact is that no matter how powerful a person is, they are not all powerful, and that's upsetting for them. They never feel like they have enough power, enough respect, enough attention, enough influence, no matter how much they have and how obvious it is to those around them. It is also similar to people who have too much money. They typically need more, and to the point when they believe they desire it more than poor people, thus finding ways to get it from others. We're not going to take it anymore. This prevalent social anarchy is so widespread that it touches every part of the globe, every age group and economic class. It has been around for thousands of years, and no matter how many rules and laws we create and enforce, we have not made any significant efforts to successfully identify and fix these social problems. As a result, leaders and followers resemble behaviors of animals, adults act like children, and sadly, humans act like robots. Ranking and status. It's in our DNA. It's a part of human biology to unconsciously rank everyone in every environment, and rarely, if ever, does it have to do anything to do with the individual's character or their contribution to society. As part of my studies, power can be recognized beyond sight and sound, and even smell. We make animal-based and fear-based decisions constantly because of people's various statuses and ranks in whatever environment we are in. Basically, brown-nosing is a part of neuroscience. Sociology, biology, history, and even prehistory. Personally, I reached a point in my life trying to function at the bottom of every social system I encountered as a multimedia artist and activist, where ass-kissing no longer worked for me. In fact, I not only lost my ability to do so, I also developed an unconscious aversion to anything that remotely smelled like giving in one bit to the abuse of power, even to the point where I refused to follow anything or anyone. I don't even do the Pledge of Allegiance anymore. Just because I was born in the USA doesn't mean I have to worship it, nor its dull three-colored flag. Nobody owns me. Nothing owns me. Freedom is miserable for those who live at the bottom of a social anarchy that they encounter. People who live in that level of personal freedom without personal power are viewed as threats to society. Powerful people are viewed as those who deserve more freedom.